Today we're gonna learn an easy way to blur the background in Photoshop. Now, this is, I know, one of the most age-old questions, but it never gets old. So we're gonna do this by using 3 simple steps. Number 1, we're gonna make a selection. No matter what method you use to blur the background, whatever method which has been invented ever since Photoshop was born, involves making a selection in one way or the other. Number 2, we're gonna create a depth map. Now, what is a depth map? Well, a depth map is a map, of course, which we give to Photoshop, and through that map, Photoshop determines the depth perception. Photoshop has the depth perception through that map. Now, what is depth perception? Now, let me rephrase that for you. A depth map is a map which tells Photoshop, okay, the subject is nearby and the tree is at the back. That's pretty much it. Subject is 10 meters from the camera and the tree is 1 kilometer away from the camera. That's what a depth map does. It doesn't tell Photoshop what to blur, what to keep in focus. It just gives Photoshop the information of the distance. In this case, the relative distance. And number 3, of course, blurring the background. Now, once you have a depth map, you can tell Photoshop, okay, keep the background in focus and the subject blurred, or keep the subject focus or the background blurred. It's totally upon you. A depth map will give Photoshop just the information, and based on that information, you can make whatever decisions you like. So, magic will happen, and let's make magic happen. So without any further ado, let's get started. So here we are in Photoshop, and if you want to follow along using this photo, make sure to go ahead and download it using the links in the description. So first off, let's make a selection, but before that, make a copy of the background layer to be on the safer side. To do that, really simple, press Ctrl or Command J, right? This makes a copy. Now, we need to make a selection of the subject, right? So, you can use any method to make a selection. You can use the quick selection tool, this one right here, or you can use the select and mask if you're using anything beyond Photoshop CC 2015.5, which I would highly suggest. So select any selection tool, the quick selection or the lasso or whatever tool you want, and just click on this select and mask, okay? Just do that. Now this takes you to a completely different dialog box which is dedicated to making precise selections. So let's go ahead and zoom in, and let's keep the view to say background on black, okay? Now, anything which is not selected will be black. Anything which is selected will appear the way it is if the opacity is 100%. Okay? If the opacity is 0%, everything will be shown irrespective of whether you have selected it or not. For example, let's keep the opacity somewhere at around 75%. This gives you a little bit of a middle ground, and then once you select it, using the quick selection tool. Now, inside of this dialog box, you have the quick selection tool, you have the refine edge tool, everything inside of it. Okay, so let's try making a selection there. Okay, we're making a selection. Now, watch what's happening. Anything which is selected will appear the way it is. Anything which is not selected will appear darker or black if the opacity is 100. If the opacity is 0, everything will be shown. Now, it will take time. Once you're creating a selection to blur the background or to create a depth map, you need to be very careful because the process is destructive. I'm going to say that again. You need to be really careful. Why? Because once you apply the blur, you cannot adjust the edges. It's destructive. So make sure you're very precise with the selection. Okay, so let's go ahead and zoom in. As we can see, we have selected a little extra there. So, by the way, once you are zoomed in order to move, hold the spacebar key. And once you hold the spacebar key, see the cursor changes to a hand. And now you can easily move. Alright, so this has selected some trees. We didn't want that. So, simple. Hold the Alt key. See, it changes to a minus. And then deselect these areas. You really need to be very careful while making this selection. Now, let's make a rough selection very fast. Okay, there we go. See, we need to deselect that, and the trees have been selected. Pretty good. It's okay if we select the stone, that's not a problem because that will be in focus. Only this area which is in the background will not be in focus. Now you need to be careful while selecting those guitar, that back of the guitar. Okay. Alright, now we need to refine the selection. Okay. Okay, that's pretty much a rough selection. Now it's time for us to zoom in and really get the selection right. So let's go ahead and zoom in and let's inspect each edge. So using this, and let's see whether the selection is all right. This is all right there, not so bad. Now you have to be really careful. You can also use pen tool if you want. And there's an extra selection there. We need to subtract that. I'm gonna fast forward this process because this can get really boring. So let's do that right now.
I'm flying high, but I've got a feeling I'm falling for nobody else but you. You caught my eye, and I've got a feeling I'm falling. Show me the ring and
Now we have made a basic selection. Now there are some edges which require refining. For example, look at the hair on his beard, okay? So let's select this area. This is selected. So this has to be smooth. So for that, we're going to use this refine edge. Really simple. Just paint over the edge. Anything which is messy, just paint over there and it will automatically detect the edges. And if you go ahead and increase the opacity, you'll be able to see that it selects some beard very nicely. So have a look here. It was not able to select this. Delete this. So with the refine edge, let's try it. Let's see what it does. Yeah, pretty good job. Didn't do an awesome job, but that's okay. Alright, so let's zoom out a little bit and let's inspect it one last time. Now, there is no possible way in which Photoshop can detect the edges of these knobs, right? So we have to do that manually. We can do this by using this brush, or we could have just pressed OK and done that later. So let's do it right now. Once this dialog box is open, let's do it right here. So let's decrease the opacity, and this brush is nothing but manual, just like a brush, and we have to paint in the areas we want to select. So let's just, there we go, just like that. Guys, this is the most time-consuming part, making the selection. After that, everything is very easy. So once you have the selection right in place, have a look. It is a pretty good selection, and we need to select pretty much a little more areas here. We can do that later. Just make sure in the output, just select layer mask. And once you have done that, click OK. Now, if I just turn this off, have a look. This layer has just this, okay? Just this. And we forgot to delete an area right here, okay? And the selection is not very precise. Make sure to have a precise selection. Okay, this area we can delete that. Take a brush, okay, make it smaller, make it a little smoother. By the way, I held the Alt or Option and the right mouse button, drag it to the right to make it bigger, drag it to the left to make it smaller. Okay, so let's make it a little smaller and paint in black in these areas. Now again, what is the concept of layer masks? White shows up and black hides. That's it. Now paint this area with black with the mask selected. Be very careful. And I'm going to do this really quickly, just for demo purposes. There we go, just like that. And I did a little extra. Okay, so anytime you do a little extra, you have to toggle the foreground color to white. Okay, to toggle, press X. Make sure the foreground color is white, and you can toggle again by pressing X repeatedly. And if the foreground or the background color is something else, you can press D to reset the swatches. Okay, so if you did something wrong, you can always go ahead, make it white and paint in this area back, just like that. And then you can go back to black and resume your deletion, if that's a word, okay, or hiding it. Okay, I did a very quick job. You could also have used the quick selection tool, but I did it with a brush. There we go, it's done. Now if we just go ahead and turn this on, we need these areas in focus too. So let's take the brush and make it soft. Mask is selected, foreground color is white, and then paint in these areas, just like that. Okay, with this off, have a look. Alright, now this is fine. Now, it's about creating the depth map. By the way, we have created the depth map half away. Have a look. So this is the depth map. If you're wondering what I just did, I held the Alt key and clicked on the mask. This will show me just the mask. So a depth map is in the form of black and white. 100% pure white is the object which is nearest to the camera or the screen. 100% black is the object which is furthest from the camera, or infinity. Okay. So anything which is completely black is totally away from the camera. Anything which is completely white is nearest to the camera. Now anything which is gray is somewhere in the middle. So it's not just black and white. In this example, as you can see, if we just bring it back, this gradually has to go blurred. Focus, sharp, a little blur, more blur, totally blur, right? Just like that. It cannot go suddenly blurred from this line, from this strange line. If I just turn on the mask, it just cannot go suddenly blurred from this point on. It would look fake. So it has to go blur gradually because the distance is increasing gradually, right? So you need to show that in the depth map. Now the depth map shows that, look very carefully. The depth map shows you that according to it, this is very near as suddenly it goes very far. But in reality, it's not the case. This is near and gradually it goes far, right? Here too, it's a little bit gradual here, but the shift is very fast. Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Okay, so it has to be gradual, right? So open up the mask, hold the Alt key, click on it. This opens up the mask and we need to make it gradual. So for that, very simple, take the brush, make sure it's white, make it a little bigger, make it a little softer. Okay, and just paint in a little, and you can also decrease the flow if you want to maybe 10% and make it a little soft, just like that. Okay, this one too, a little bit here. It suddenly doesn't have to go. Okay, now have a look at the image again. Now this is good. It goes gradually out of focus. This goes gradually out of focus. Have a look at this again. Now once you're ready with this, everything is fine. This is near. It's gradually going out of focus, giving it a depth map. That's fine. Now all you have to do, simple, very simple. It's destructive, so make sure the selection is right, make sure the depth map is right, everything is in place. Only once you're confirmed that everything is right, then select this layer and go to Filter, Blur, Lens Blur. In the source, you gotta select Layer Mask because you're using Layer Mask as a depth map. Now it's gonna take some time, have a look, but it's gonna give you amazing results. Have a look at this. The background is completely out of focus right now. It's loading, and I'm gonna choose faster here for faster loading. Let's see how fast it loads. Okay, it's completely blurred, but have a look. It's still very quick. Right? We should have made it more softer. And that's why I said, once you're confirmed that the mask is right, only then apply this. You can go ahead and cancel this and modify the depth map again. Now I will just go ahead and decrease the blurriness. Now let's understand this from top to bottom. So preview, faster and more accurate. This doesn't mean anything. You can just switch to faster. This is just for preview. So whatever is previewed here will be a little less of a quality if you choose faster, but it will load fast. It will show you the changes fast. But irrespective of what you select here, the end result will be fine and amazing, awesome quality. So I keep it faster and check the preview. Now, depth map. See, I told you about depth map. Depth map tells Photoshop which object is nearer, which object is further. That's it. Now, what do you want to use as depth map? We're going to choose Layer Mask because we created Layer Mask as a depth map. So for this, we can choose Layer Mask. You can also create an alpha channel. A lot of tutorials teach you how to do that, and I'm going to show you in a minute. So Layer Mask is fine. And blur focal distance. Now, it gives you the option of what exactly do you want to blur. Do you want to blur the background or do you want to blur the foreground, right? So also you can blur something in between. So for example, in your depth map, there are two objects. One object is nearest to the camera and you have made it completely white. One object is say 10 meters away from the camera and you have made it gray and the background is completely black. So suppose you want to blur the object which is nearer and keep in focus the object which is 10 meters away. You can control that by using this. So if I go ahead and increase this, just like that, have a look, this goes blurred and this is in focus, and you can control what exactly is in focus right here. So, but we're gonna keep it all the way to the left, just like this, 0. And you can also use invert. So if we check off the invert, it will blur the subject and keep the background in focus. And if we check invert, it will do the opposite. So if you see the opposite happening, just play with the invert and make sure it's in 0, the blur focal distance. Now what's the radius? It controls the amount of blur. How much blur do you want? Okay, it actually controls the aperture. Photography folks, you already know that. The wider the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. Okay, and the more blurred the background will be. So I'm gonna keep it somewhere around 52 is fine. Let's see how that looks. That looks more natural. A little more, just a little more. Now this is a little slow because this is a huge image. Okay, that's fine. Now the blade curvature. How curved each blade is. Doesn't matter, keep it at 2 fine, rotation is fine. Now the shape controls the opening of the camera through which the light enters. Do you want it to be hexagon? Do you want it to be octagon? Whatever you want. I'm gonna leave that to hexagon because it's gonna be useful when you have lights in the background and you create that bokeh effect, right? So if you had lights, but this doesn't. Okay, so this is where specular highlights comes into play. If you had some lights in the background, you could have just decreased the threshold like that. And see, it creates highlights. It's too much, of course. I would increase the threshold a little bit. It's going to be effective when you have light, just showing you for showing purposes. And then if you go ahead and increase the brightness, have a look what happens. Okay, so if you go ahead and increase the brightness, have a look. It creates some bokeh effect and some hexagon. Have a look at these hexagon rings, hexagon lights. So that's what it is. You can change the shape right here, but we don't need this for this example. Just play with this and you'll be fine whenever there is light in the background. So I'll just go ahead and decrease it, make it 0 and increase this threshold all the way to the maximum number. So there we go, 255, that's fine. Now whenever you're blurring the background, you might want to add a little bit of noise if your image has noise. Now why to do that? Suppose your image has a little bit of noise and you're blurring the background in post. Now, when you blur the background, you also blur the noise. So when you zoom in, when somebody zooms in and see the background doesn't have noise, but the image has, but the subject has, now it looks strange. So to match up with that of the things which are in focus, you need to add some artificial noise. But for this, I don't think. But if you're adding some noise, make sure it's Gaussian, monochromatic, and then increase the amount. Just like that. But in this, we don't need any noise. So we'll just keep the amount to 0. And that's fine. Once you're ready, once you're satisfied, click OK. Now this is a little slow filter, might take a little bit of time depending upon the size of the image. So click OK with patience. But before we do, let's check whether everything is right. Blur focal distance, this has to be 0 and everything is right. Layer mask, radius is great, everything is great. OK. Click OK. It should do the work. So finally the effect has been applied and we are done. Who am I kidding? By the way, you cannot see the blur right now. Why? Because it's hidden with a layer mask. We need to turn off the layer mask. Okay, so hold the shift and click on it. And there you go, it's ready. Or you can also go ahead and delete the layer mask. But that's not a very efficient thing to do. You know why? Because you want to have the depth mask in reserve. Suppose you want to make some change and apply the blur again, right? So you want to keep that. Also what you can do, you can create an alpha channel of it, right? So as I talked to you before, I told that I'll show you. So here's what you can do. You can make a selection of this by holding the control or command and clicking on this and then going to the channels, selecting the RGB and then clicking on this. Okay, you already have the layer mask here and you have alpha 1 right there. Press Ctrl or Command D to deselect that. Come back to layers and you can now delete it, doesn't matter. It will ask you apply layer mask before removing. No, just delete it. And that's pretty much fine. Now watch, you could have also done that before and applied the lens blur by choosing the source alpha 1. Make sense? No? Let me show it to you. So let's just turn it off, make another copy, and when you go to filter, blur, lens blur, in case you did it before, you could choose the source as alpha 1 and it will do it nicely. Now it does just the opposite. Check off the invert and it will be fine. Done, right? So cancel that. We didn't want to do it. And that's how, let's turn this on. So that's an easy way to blur the background in Photoshop, of course, after taking the picture. Just remember, it will always be better to get the shallow depth of field in camera by using a wider aperture. Alright. And if you're doing it in Photoshop, here's the recap. Number 1, make a great selection. Selection is very important. Make sure the selection that you make is precise in the first place because this is destructive. Once you apply the blur, you cannot modify the edges. So make sure the selection is right. Then creating a depth map. After you make a selection, determine which object is further, which object is nearer, and therefore create a depth map. If it's gradual, make it gradual. Number 3, apply the blur. Go to lens blur and choose the source, alpha 1 or layer mask, depending upon how and where have you created your depth map. Hope that made sense to you, and if it did, make sure to give us a like, and also don't forget to subscribe, and not just subscribe, ring the bell so that you, my friend, don't miss a thing. I'll see you guys in my next one. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.